There's been a lot revealed about Warzone 2, and a lot that has allegedly been changed already based off of some feedback and a couple of leaks. Now, I'm going to take these leaks to be honest, as some of the sources are fairly confident and seemingly do seem to get a lot right, and it appears that loadout drops have returned to Warzone 2, perks have returned to Warzone 2, and AI has been removed from Warzone 2 bar the strongholds. So a couple of changes that I think a lot of people wanted to happen have seemingly happened before the game has even released. But there's some things that need to be spoken about that I don't think anybody else has really covered yet that Warzone 2 needs to completely avoid. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings on some of these things that I'm going to be speaking about, so make sure you hit the sub button and let me know what you think in the comment section below. Now, the first removal might come as a surprise to you, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Now, picture this, a Warzone 2 where overkill doesn't exist, but you could still pick up 2 weapons, but it just requires a little bit more work. So why should Warzone 2 do this, and what if any benefit is there to this system existing? And the answer is actually pretty simple. Warzone 2 has a big problem on its hands that it hasn't even thought about, and a lot of people haven't thought about this, and it's the system of metas. Warzone 1, and one of the reasons so many people quit the original Warzone experience, was because they were unable to constantly keep up with the never-ending shift of meta weapons, which often favored overly broken weapons like the UGM, or zero recoil weapons like the STG, or just flat-out ridiculous weapons like the DMR. When you have a meta system that shifts so often and gets patched so regularly, and your weapons level up to level 70, you constantly have the casual players who never quite get the unlocks for these weapons, are constantly destroyed by people who are far more sweaty than them, and for the most part of it, just simply don't enjoy the game because they're always at a competitive disadvantage. And this has led to a lot of players leaving Warzone. The meta shift has been a fairly huge problem, and something that I don't think a lot of creators and a lot of people in the Call of Duty space has even thought about. Yes, loadout drops are an important part of Warzone. They're an essential part, really, because they make a different experience every single time, and people enjoy the faster paced variety that Warzone has compared to something like PUBG. But this is still a major problem that needs addressing and needs fixing. And getting rid of overkill might just fix that problem, and it comes with a lot of benefits. For starters, everybody has to choose one weapon. If you want a good AR, you have to choose the AR, but you won't have a good SMG. If you want a sniper rifle, you won't have an AR or an SMG. If you want a light machine gun, you might be beaten by an SMG at close range. And it means that the meta classes and categories will shift a lot more often and be much more open, allowing people to compete with any weapon of their choice. It also incentivizes looting, because it means that players will actually have to loot the map to find a decent secondary to use. If you decide to pick a meta sniper rifle, you might want to go and look around for a decent AR off the floor or a decent SMG to keep you protected at close range. But they won't be meta weapons, so if somebody does have a meta SMG, they'll probably beat your ground loot SMG in some scenarios, unless you happen to get the drop on them. And if you want 2 powerful weapons, well, you're going to have to buy a second loadout drop, which is very expensive, and you might have to sacrifice certain perks to make that happen, or sacrifice other pieces of equipment to make it work. I think this is a really good idea that will open up the meta, and there's a good reason for why this system will work so well. Have you ever played a game of Warzone where you kill a squad and they're using the exact same weapon that you are because you're both using meta guns? That won't be able to be an option in Warzone 2. Let's say, for example, one of the assault rifles in the game, like the SCAR, ends up being the meta assault rifle. If everybody in the game is running the SCAR, then you've inadvertently nerfed the entire server. Because let's say, for example, that SCAR player runs into somebody with a meta SMG. The meta SMG player is going to beat the meta SCAR player at close range. And that means that if anybody else on the server happens to be running the same meta weapon over and over and over again, the same SCAR H over and over and over again, they won't be able to loot their opponents for new weapons that will diversify their playset. They'll be stuck with the same weapon over and over and over again. And it's a really intelligent system whereby if something is a meta choice pick, it ends up being incidentally nerfed because nobody can have 2 separate weapons that benefit them. Don't get me wrong, the UGM is a great weapon in Warzone 1 for example, but it's completely useless without a close range SMG to back you up in CQB situations. So if the whole server's running UGMs and nobody has a meta SMG, or very few people do, then you're going to run into a lot of scenarios where the UGM actually ends up being useless, or you have to constantly loot to find a good SMG to back it up with. Overall, I think getting rid of the overkill system, or making it substantially harder to get two primary weapons that you want, would genuinely benefit Warzone 2 in a lot of ways that I don't think many people are thinking about, so I hope it's something that they do. The next thing I would love to see removed is what I'm going to universally refer to as cheese. And what I mean by this is just the cheap crutches of Warzone that make the game less enjoyable. And I'll give you some examples. Combat Scout is a cheese perk that's completely ridiculous and basically gives you a wall hack. The stun grenade is absolutely abhorrent. It just basically means that if somebody throws a stun grenade, you're going to lose that gunfight, and you have basically zero counters or escape to it. Gas grenades are a great example of this because sometimes they glitch through walls, although allegedly they're probably going to be fixed in Warzone 2. There are lots of examples of things in this game that just don't make a lot of sense or end up being super overpowered. Serpentine was a great example of that. And the thing with these perks, and the issue with some of these perks and pieces of equipment like stun grenades, is that they seem to think that it will help the normal player. But in reality it doesn't. It actually makes things far, far worse for the average Joe. If you give somebody with a 3 KD Combat Scout, I can assure you that they will exploit it far more than somebody on a 1 KD account. So things like Combat Scout, things like Serpentine, things like stun grenades, and things that just generally make the experience in Warzone cheaper and less consistent are things that need to be avoided at all costs. Yeah, sure, getting a few easy kills because you've got a light machine gun and Combat Scout might be a good feeling for a player, but I guarantee you'll end up being eliminated by exactly the same thing. And generally speaking, I actually don't really see the need for perks at all. This is an entirely separate conversation and discussion, but I would much rather if everybody universally had the same setups in terms of the perk setup than having random arbitrary things that make the experience different. You know, I don't want to lose to somebody because they happen to have Quick Fix on, and I happen to have Cold Blooded on, or I don't want to lose to somebody because they happen to have Battle Hardened on, but I decided to choose something else. I think that adds a lot of inconsistency to the game, and I'm interested to see what you guys think about perks returning in Warzone 2. And the final thing that I think needs to be avoided at all costs in Warzone 2, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, is zero recoil metas. This has without a doubt been the worst part of Warzone 1 and has made the game feel completely trash. Nobody wants to be killed by a UGM, STG, gosh, what was before those? The XM4, after the XM4 it'll be something else, you know. There are so many separate guns that are literally the same thing over and over again that it literally blows my mind. The C40 or whatever the hell it's called, the Cold War weapon. There was also another one from Vanguard. I forget vaguely what it's called because I refuse to use it. The NZ41, there you go, that's another example. And the reason I don't remember most of these weapon names is because in my head, they're literally just the same thing. A high rate of fire, low recoil spam machine that anybody in their NAN can use. And yes, accessible weapons should exist in Warzone 2. And if you struggle with things like recoil compensation, there should always be a gateway to understanding those systems. But no way should they be that powerful. That was the worst part of Warzone 1. People deserve to be rewarded for things like skill. If you choose an AK and it does good damage output, you deserve to be rewarded for recoil compensation. And things like that have to change in Warzone 2. We can't constantly have metas where, you know, anybody who picks up a hipfire PPSH is suddenly the best player in the world. That is not a good system for a battle royale. The no recoil metas and the cheap metas that I were talking about, and things like the overall meta spam of stuff like overkill, are compounding issues. And when you experience being killed by Combat Scout through a wall with a no recoil UGM, and 7 other people in his team are also running a UGM, it stops you wanting to play the game. And it stopped a lot of casuals playing Warzone as well. So these are all things that I hope change really quickly with Warzone 2, and I'll be fascinated to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. So let me know what you're thinking. What do you not want to see in Warzone 2? And I'll catch you again in the next video.